RJC. Thank you for that warm welcome. It is great to be here at the Republican Jewish Coalition National Leadership Meeting, just 12 months away from a great Republican comeback, and RJC will lead the way. To Norm Coleman, Matt Brooks, my mentor and friend, Hart and Simona Haston from Indiana. It's my great honor to be with all of you today, and to know that right here and right now, from this point forward, we will all resolve to do our part to win back the House, the Senate, governorships across America in 2022, and we're going to win back this country in 2024. But as we gather tonight, I know all of your hearts are where mine are, and that is one empty chair this evening. And so allow me to pay tribute to a man without whose leadership we would not be here. Sheldon Adelson was so much more than just an extraordinary businessman and philanthropist. Sheldon Adelson was a warrior, a patriot, a proud U.S. Army veteran, and a zealous and unapologetic defender of Zion, Jerusalem, and the United States of America. And let me say from my heart, may all who mourn this extraordinary man be comforted with the thanks and the love of the country and the people he did so much to support. And especially to Miriam. Zichrono livracha. May his memory be a constant source of blessing to you, your children, and your grandchildren. America will never forget or fail to honor the extraordinary leadership of Sheldon Adelson. But I came here tonight just to say thank you. Thank you for the privilege of serving in the most pro-America, pro-Israel administration in American history. You know, it was the greatest honor of my life to serve as vice president with President Donald Trump. And I will always be proud of the record that we assembled together with your support. We rebuilt our military. We revived our economy. We unleashed American energy. We saw more than 300 conservatives confirmed to our federal courts. And in the midst of the worst pandemic in 100 years, we launched the greatest national mobilization since World War II. And under the Trump-Pence administration, if the world knew nothing else, the world knew this: America stands with Israel. The Trump-Pence administration ensured that Israel would always have the resources to be able to defend herself by herself. And I'm proud to report that under our administration, American support for Israel's security was greater than ever before. And I know you've heard from this podium already at this conference, but it bears reciting. With your support, our administration was able to take historic steps to strengthen the ties between the American people and the Jewish state of Israel. We acknowledged Israel's sovereignty over the Golan Heights. We declared that Israeli settlements in the West Bank were not inconsistent with international law. We pulled the United States out of the UN Human Rights Council for its blatant anti-Israel bias, and we shut down the PLO office in Washington, D.C. We signed the strongest executive order ever written to fight anti-Semitism. And maybe most important of all, we withdrew from the Iran nuclear deal We confronted Iran's malign behavior. We vigorously enforced sanctions to bring Iran's oil exports to zero, and Qasem Soleimani is gone. On the day we left office, the Iranian regime was weaker and more isolated than ever before. And of course, after years of broken promises across 4 previous administrations, it was President Donald Trump and our administration that kept our promise to the American people and our most cherished ally when we moved the American embassy to Jerusalem, the capital of the State of Israel. But every step of the way, Democrats and self-proclaimed experts derided our approach. Remember? They issued dire warnings about what would come if we stood so steadfastly with Israel. But as usual, they were wrong. And a little more than a year ago, we proved just how wrong they were when leaders from Israel, Bahrain, the UAE, and the United States signed the Abraham Accords. It was a season of extraordinary progress, and members of the Republican Jewish Coalition, I hope you take great pride in all that we were able to do for the American people and to strengthen our ties with our most cherished ally. But how times have changed. As we gather for this national leadership meeting, America is a nation in crisis. Under President Joe Biden, we're facing the worst border crisis in our nation's history. Runaway spending, the largest tax increase in 50 years being planned, driving a supply chain crisis, and the worst inflation in 30 years. Their radical left agenda is driving up the price of gasoline for working families. A woke crisis in education is dividing our kids by race and silencing students on campuses across America. And the disastrous withdrawal in Afghanistan was a disgrace. And make no mistake about it, President Joe Biden has turned his back on Israel as well. He restored funding to the Palestinian Authority. He announced his intention to rejoin the Iran nuclear deal. And now the Biden administration is planning to open a consulate in Jerusalem for the Palestinian people. This is an unlawful step, and it's time for Congress to act to deny President Biden from opening a consulate in Jerusalem where the American embassy stands. I think you all know that a careful study of history proves that weakness arouses evil. And after the president's disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan, our adversaries are sensing weakness. They're emboldened to test our resolve. In fact, they've already begun to do so. Missiles being fired by North Korea once again. And of course, the Iranian regime launching a drone strike on a U.S. base in Syria. But let me say, after traveling all across this country as your vice president over the last 4 years, however weak the current administration may be, the American people are strong, and they will stand with those who stand for freedom. So I just want to thank you. I want to thank you for your steadfast support over the past 4 years and for your prayers. And I want to thank you for all you've done to strengthen the U.S.-Israel alliance. We stand with Israel today at a critical moment in the life of our relationship. And we stand with Israel for the same reason the American people have always stood with Israel. We stand with Israel because her cause is our cause. Her values are our values. And her fight is our fight. We stand with Israel because we believe in right over wrong and good over evil. And we stand with Israel because we hold fast to that ancient promise that those who bless her will be blessed. As the great Winston Churchill said in a speech before the Congress in the midst of World War II, he said, quote, "He must indeed have a blind soul who cannot see that some great purpose is being worked out here below, of which we have the privilege to be faithful servants." So it can be said of this nation, and even more so of Israel, there is a great and invisible hand at work in history. I mean, think about it. How probable is it that a man named Abraham would leave the Ur of the Chaldeans and travel north? He ruled no empire, he commanded no army, performed no miracles. But how probable is it that he should become the most influential man in the history of the human race? How probable is it that his descendants would outlive and outshine the world's greatest empires, and to this day remain strong and proud and free? How likely is it that after 2,000 years of exile, after millennia of being scattered to the four corners of the earth, after centuries of relentless persecution and hardship, and just 4 years after walking through the valley of the shadow of death, that the Jewish people should return to their ancestral homeland to create a new, free, proud, and prosperous state of Israel? But so it was promised so long ago. In the words of Jeremiah, the Lord says, "I will come to you and fulfill my good promise to bring you back to this place. For I know the plans I have for you, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you a hope and a future." So, my fellow Americans, thank you for coming here tonight. Thank you for claiming a hope and a future for our nation and our most cherished ally. Let us continue to draw inspiration from the story of Israel, and in a word, even in these challenging times, let's keep the faith. Let's keep faith with the ideals of our founders enshrined in the Declaration and the Constitution. Let's keep faith with 74 million Americans who know in their heart that the sun has not set on this land of the free. And let's keep faith that Him who has ever guided this great American experiment and His chosen people guides us still. Because God is not done with America or Israel yet. And I know the best days for our nations are yet to come. Thank you for the honor. God bless you all.
Boy, Mr. Vice President, do we miss you. Does America miss you? Those of us who love Israel miss you. Thanks for the opportunity to have a little conversation. And there's a lot to ask. I gotta start off with a softball. I'm going to give you a softball question. Softball question to start with. So tell us just 3 things that if you were running in the Oval Office that you'd be doing different from what the Biden administration is doing to America right now?
Everything, and everything. No, it really is amazing, Norm, if you think about it. And RJC members know this, but it does seem to me that after spending an entire campaign in his basement, articulating very few policy positions to my recollection, the Biden administration is essentially advancing an agenda that is, from day one, has been an effort to undo the successful policies of our administration. And, but I'm not going to tell you, 12 months from now, we're going to start to get it all back. I believe it with all my heart.
So if without question, Donald J. Trump was the best friend that Israel ever had in the White House, Mike Pence is the best friend that Israel ever had as Vice President of the United States. One of the things that I heard as I listened to your remarks, you talked about. Let's start in Israel, the Republican Jewish Coalition, Ambassador Dermot. There. Well, let's start by a conversation about Israel. I'm trying to figure out what's the most monumental thing. Was it getting out of the JCPOA and obviously moving the embassy on and on? But let's talk about. You talked about the promise that the president made about moving the embassy. I know it's a promise that he made to Sheldon. Sheldon was right there all the time about fulfilling that promise. I heard a story about how that went down. That decision went down in the White House, in the Oval, in the without a Situation Room or wherever it was that it went down. But it wasn't a unanimous decision. I presume, Mr. Vice President, that you had a number of institutional folks expressing, what they had to do for the folks they represented, or that this would be problematic. The world would come to an end. The Arab world would rise up, et cetera. And I'm told that the last voice was your voice before the president made his decision. Can you give us
second to last?
Second, okay. Can you give us some insight about that conversation now, as we sit here?
Well, I think it really was an extraordinary example of presidential leadership. I mean, 4 different presidents, when they were candidates for the office, had promised the American people, 2 Republicans, 2 Democrats, that they would move the American embassy to Jerusalem. Jerusalem is the only capital in the world where our embassy was not located. And I can tell you, Norm, to say that every leader in the world opposed President Trump moving the embassy to Jerusalem would be an understatement. I mean, literally, I was there in the Oval Office many times when the calls had come in from heads of state, one after another after another. And Lee, you remember this as well, hearing all about it, telling the president why it couldn't happen. And I literally was there watching some of the leaders in our own foreign policy establishment, including some in positions of authority, who were telling the president that it couldn't occur. But I have to tell you, I saw President Trump turn his face like flint against the wind. He believed in 2 things. Number one, that when you take what's not negotiable off the table, that you might be able to actually negotiate. And Jerusalem, as the eternal capital of Israel, is non-negotiable. And the other thing, and it wasn't unique just to this issue, I saw a lot of conversations end in the Oval Office, and the great Kellyanne Conway is here as well. She saw them. Isn't she great? How many conversations ended when the president would simply say, well, that's what I said I was going to do. We said we were going to rebuild the military, we said we were going to cut taxes, and we said we were going to move the American embassy to Jerusalem, and it happened because the president kept the word he gave to the American people. Plain and simple.
And I think the vice president is being modest with his humility, which he's a very humble man. But I know that his voice was a voice that really said, that's a promise that you made, and it's a promise that should be kept. And the president pounded his fist, and the promise was kept, and we're all grateful. Thank you. Can we, Congressman Mike Waltz on the Armed Services Committee this afternoon talked about China, Chinese Communist Party being the greatest threat to America right now. Some people think that, the thought was that if we kind of brought China into, opened up and brought our ideas to them, that they would turn like us. And as you kind of look at that, it seems maybe things are going in the other direction. Can you kind of give me your sense of how that's playing out?
Well, let me be candid with you, and Senator, you and I have known each other a long time. And I'll be honest, in my years in Congress, anytime any issue relative to China came up, I was someone that believed if you expand economic exchange with China, you would be strengthening the better angels of their nature, that economic freedom would give way and promote political liberties, freedom of speech, freedom of religion. But what our administration was able to articulate is that exactly the opposite has occurred. That as China has become more prosperous, in fact, it's become more authoritarian. It's used the largesse that it's gleaned from, up to our administration, unbridled access to the American economy, the largest economy in the world, to enrich themselves, to build a massive military that they've used in provocative ways in the South China Sea and most recently in the Taiwan Straits. Intellectual property theft occurring on a regular basis among American corporations and institutions of higher education. Human rights abuses against Muslim Uyghurs and Christians and people of faith in China, breaking their word to Hong Kong, and now the menacing message toward Taiwan. And of course, worst of all, is that China did not come clean with the world at the outset of COVID, and we need to hold China accountable for the impact of the coronavirus pandemic on the world. I mean, but in the midst of all of that, I'm pleased to report to you that I think one of the enduring legacies of our administration is that we changed the national consensus on China. And I will tell you that I think there is a broad and bipartisan recognition, Senator Graham would agree with me, on Capitol Hill, that China today represents the most significant strategic challenge that we have, the most significant threat to our economy and in the long term to our security on the face of the earth. And it's the reason why our administration took strong steps to impose tariffs on China. I'm at least pleased at this point that the Biden administration has not undone those, although I read in the newspapers that that's being given consideration. And the truth of the matter is, what we need to be doing is accelerating the pressure on the Chinese Communist Party until they open their markets, cease the theft of intellectual property, cease the provocative military behavior in the South China Sea, and respect the basic human rights and liberties of their people. We should condition access to the American economy on a respect for the international rules of freedom.
Mr. Vice President, I want to end this conversation talking about faith. You ran for Congress twice, I think, as a decaffeinated Rush Limbaugh, and it weren't successful.
Well, Rush Limbaugh on decaf.
On decaf.
Yeah.
And I'm told that there was a conversation you had with your wife, with Karen, about whether you're going to run again. And I understand it's an important conversation. Perhaps if you hadn't had it, I may not be sitting here with you right now. Your path would have been different. Can you talk about how your faith impacts your decision-making and your policy-making?
Well, thanks, Norm. I'm happy to share that story, and thanks for your evident faith and the way it has shined through and inspired all of us throughout the course of your life and your career. So we had run for Congress a couple of times when I had black hair and was, okay, admittedly a lot thinner. But we lost those races for Congress. And 10 years later, the opportunity came back around. We had 3 kids under the age of 6. And I can tell you, it was a very difficult decision for us. And I was making a living in radio and television. I was home for dinner at night. But Karen and I felt drawn to the opportunity to serve our country after the disgraceful years of the Clinton administration. But it was a tough decision. And we found ourselves out west. We like to ride horses. And Karen and I saddled up a couple horses and we rode up to a place called Chimney Rock in the Teddy Roosevelt National Forest. We got off the horses and we were going back and forth about whether we'd run or not run or not run. The candidates that are in the room will tell you it's never an easy decision to step forward because you understand the cost. But as we were standing there in Chimney Rock, mulling it over, we saw these 2 red-tailed hawks, and they were pirouetting up from the valley floor in a circular motion, and their wings weren't moving. And I just said to my wife, she said I was trying to be a romantic. I said, those 2 hawks are us. And then she looked at me and she said, well, then I think we should run. She said, but if we run, we need to do it like those 2 hawks. We need to spread our wings, let God take us wherever He would take us. No flapping. And that's what we've done, Norm. When that race for Congress was successful, when I put my name on the ballot to be governor of Indiana, and when I got that phone call to join a national ticket in 2016 and was asked to run again in 2020. For our little family, it's all about just letting our yes be yes and our no be no. Letting people know where we're coming from, where our hearts are, spreading our wings and just letting God put us wherever He wants us to serve. And I promise you, as long as I live, that'll always be our practice. But wherever the Lord leads us or lifts us, I'll stand with all of you and every American who stands with Israel. So thank you very much, and God bless you all.
Mr. Vice President, we love you. Let's give a big round of RJC applause. This room is filled with love, Mr. Vice President.